Hello and welcome back to Book Games Spectator. Today I'd like to discuss what are book games and how I think about spectating. Now let's start with what are book games. It's important to know from the get-go the book game's origin story involving 12 and a half. That's crucial because it changes the your consideration for a ratio. What does that mean? That means, okay, we're starting with this as a baseline assumption. All of these different signifiers in terms of the underlying as a specific token categorization for an NFT, and then you have like a modulator with regards to a frame and kind of what that entails. But the reason why I start with 12 and a half is because as a result of a lot of people gaining access to, specifically, I mean, that was the only way in many respects to gain initial access to the book games themselves. They gained access to book games via the purchase of that book, which endowed them with an entitlement to an NFT. That changes kind of how you want to think about book game spectating because it's one thing to say, okay, an NFT is worth this amount of money and I purchased it for this, it's worth this, so I got it for that. That's how I'm viewing it as a ratio. But as a result of people gaining access to these NFTs via just buying the books themselves, it changes their what's the term? Is it like cost adjusted basis, right? So it changes the psychology of how they value the tokens themselves, which can be extraordinarily crucial in terms of how you think about spectating book games because it allows for some really great arbitrage opportunities for people still kind of trying to wrap their hands around, okay, well, how do you actually value this as an asset? I mean, this is an asset based on the marketplace, it's being correlated at a specific value. Is that its value? Like, how should I value it? etc etc. So that's kind of giving the origin story for what are book games. But what are our book games? In this context, we're breaking down these ratios, right? So it says everything you need to know. There are 16 different artworks with the following rarity. Okay, so you want to think of these as your main classes in many respects, the asset classes of the content itself. Content as a bucket. The specific bucket is the book game bucket. The next derivative are these specific artworks. Empathy, drink it. Curiosity, see it through. Love of optimism. Patience helps you get fed instead of slaughtered. Your ability to be accountable counts. Humility is delicious. Self-awareness. Kindness over everything. Kind fucking candor. Ambition at the highest level. Tenacity helps you get there. Gratitude is the attitude, and conviction helps you grow. These are your main pillars in terms of book games. Secondarily, we have a like a combinatoric multiplier in terms of the quote unquote rarity. Now, what does that mean? That means for each of these specific 16 different artworks, there's a rarity multiplier. Now, if we go here, we can see a better visualization. Let's move this a little to the side. So, okay, so for gratitude is the attitude. We see there's a modulator for lava, a modulator for gold, a modulator for bubble, diamond, and hollow. If we scroll, see that's where things get complicated in terms of arbitrage. So let's stay okay at the baseline level with categories for the specific artworks. And then we're moving into a combinatoric multiplier for the different rarities. Now, yeah, that's where it gets interesting because we're kind of viewing like these as various rarities, but if you take a look at what are we gonna call it? The super players, the juggernauts, you kind of can see that these three, tenacity helps you get there, gratitude is the attitude, and conviction helps you grow. Those are the ones, excuse me, no. Yeah, conviction helps you grow, gratitude is the attitude. Those are the ones with the least insert. Oh my, see, even me, right? I've been out of the game so long, I don't even have a conscious accounting, right? So let's go. The juggernauts. That's going to be your time machine, tiny ogre, paper hands pony, and koala 2025. What that looks like, if I scroll down, are these ones. Only 15 time machine, tiny ogres in circulation, and only 478 of the koalas and of the paper hands pony. So what does that mean? That means that that's how you start your rarity stratigraphy, based on these ratios. And that's where it gets extraordinarily complicated and tricky. Because you might say, okay, well, okay, lava is less than gold, is less than bubbles, right? But as you can see from this visualization, that's not always the case. In terms of tenacity helps you get there, there's a, they're not equally weighted ratios, we'll say that. And certain ones have different ratios, like the empathy drinks it. There's only 279 of the hollows versus there being 1,000 of the hollows for various other ones, etc, right? So this is where you really cut your teeth in terms of doing your own personal due diligence, in terms of what are book games, right? Because until you really have a grasp on the specific pieces of artwork in relation to their rarities, right? With regards to understanding, okay, so this is all the same. There's the same ratio for each one of gratitude is the attitude. Okay, so which one is the one with the most in circulation? Okay, empathy drinks it. That is the one with the most in circulation. You can see the circulation counts in this visualization. To continue, that's what makes it an incredibly rewarding but also challenging and difficult prospect for spectators to just jump in and say, okay, well, what's going on and how do we weigh the ratios? But if you do your due diligence, you can find some extraordinarily great arbitrage opportunities for underpriced assets, not based on market speculation necessarily, but just based on the ratios of the underlying in circulation. So we said, okay, the artworks, various artworks, and then we said the rarities based on lava, gold, bubble, diamond, and hollow, and how that relates to the underlying artwork itself. But the trickiest part is that there are frame rarities that act as another combinatoric multiplier. So what does that mean? Okay, we're saying this is the total circulation, 125,000 total minted, right? But for each one of these asset class, you have a total, let's say ambition at the highest level, 7,691. From what we see here, these are the percentage ratios for when those 7,691 were minted. These are the purported ratios for how many of those as a total will be contained within each one of these as a subset. That's very crucial because it's not a static ratio. Sometimes you get some black versus gold versus caviar versus neon versus pearl weighted in a specific rarity, right? So you might think, oh, okay, well, champagne is the most rare, wood is the least rare. But sometimes you might have conglomerations of those where you get a champagne with a lava. You get a wood with a hollow. And those interplays are really the lifeblood of, I mean, in many respects, what makes book games so interesting, but it's also what makes it so difficult in terms of you having to pull out a scratch pad to really start to crunch the math. And this is why I'm starting this off in this context. What are book games and how I think about spectating them? You really want to pull up your ratios so that you understand. You want to have a visualization so that you can weigh the ratios. And also, I like to start here with DAP Radar to really kind of use these as your visualization to understand what's going on in the marketplace as a whole. How are people reacting to book games? What's going on? What are things that have transpired? etc etc. Now, the last thing I'd like to mention, similarly to how people got access to the tokens to begin with, and what sort of results as a reflection of how people are weighing the value of specific tokens, is also to factor in Burn Island. This is incredibly important to mention because, as we can see, there are specific ratios, 125,000 in total circulation. But like with most things in the cryptocurrency market, there's slippage because sometimes people lose access to their keys, their wallets, etc. So those unknown, already gone, you lost the wallet, darn. But on top of that, there are different, we might think of them as mini games involving aspects where tokens can be burnt. And this is extraordinarily crucial to pay attention to. So right here, if we have, oh, as we see, okay, the graveyard, 16 total eruptions, 7,138 total tokens burnt. Out of all of them, total entries, if we view the graveyard, this is really in the weeds of how I think about spectating. If you really want to get the best market arbitrage opportunities, you have to match the existing supply with the projected existing supply. What does that mean? You might think, oh my goodness, this is really, really good. But if you don't take into account that specific asset class in relation to how many have been burned, then you're really doing yourself a disservice. Because if you can understand those pockets where there has been more burned than the ratio of its prospective value or quote unquote rarity, then those are aspects where you can really sort of zoom in on the arbitrage opportunity and also make some of those trades or accumulations for the long haul in terms of your personal outlook, in terms of how you want to engage with these this marketplace as a participant. So that's where I want to leave off. What are book games and how I think about spectating? We gave a pretty decent overview. We started with understand your ratios, understand the differentiation between the artwork versus the rarity versus the frame rarity versus your super players versus the frame rarity being a percentage versus the artwork rarity by the specific asset class category of lava, gold, bubblegum, and diamond being its own unique multiplier. Okay, thank you. Until next time.